So, this is a conversation where we're going to delve into your whole life story, Malcolm. Are you nervous?
Very.
Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Tell us about that.
Tell us about the
beginning.
The
Tell
beginning,
us about
okay.
your childhood and things
So
like
I
that.
was born and raised in a northwest London suburb, somewhere between Kingsbury and Burntoke, for those of you who are familiar with that part of the world. I went to a comprehensive school, and I was really fortunate that my parents really believed in education. And so my sister and I were, I think, brought up in an environment that was very conducive to thinking that education was a way to enlightenment. So my parents, we didn't exactly live in a shoebox, but they didn't have a car till I was 15. We were the last people on the street to get a colour television, etc. So they really made huge sacrifices for us, and for which I will always be grateful. So that's where I started out. So when I was growing up, I was gay from the age of about 8, and my parents were also of Jewish descent. So I went to school feeling slightly out of it, both because of my sexuality and because of the religion of my parents. And they were both things that I found really hard to accept. And when you're a kid at school, you want to be like everybody else. You don't really want to be different. And that affected the way I grew up. And I was telling Claire when we had a little chat that I'm not going to tell you how long ago this was, but when I was doing my A-levels, I was never seen as somebody who was academically gifted at school. And my school actually had an Oxbridge stream because it was the combination of a secondary modern and a grammar school. And there were a bunch of people in the Oxbridge stream. And I was quite quiet then, which some people might find a bit hard to believe now, but I was quite quiet then. And I got 3 A's, at A-level a long time ago. And, and the school was completely surprised, and I was never in this group of people that were being trained to go on to great things. And I went to the college around the corner because, I hadn't really put myself forward. And I sometimes wonder, if I hadn't have been carrying the idea of being different and feeling conscious about that, whether I would behave differently at school. But we can all look back, can't we? Whatever you are, and say, God, if only this, if only that. So it wasn't a big thing, but it was just one of those early events that I always carry with me. And I was sort of thinking about that the other day. And I can remember in chemistry, which I really loved, sitting on the back row of the lab. And I used to sort of sit up in bed at night reading chemistry textbooks. It shows how exciting my childhood was. I could tell you the periodic table backwards. And there was a question asked by Mr. Peacock, the chemistry teacher, and I thought I'll stick my hand up, and no one else had their hand up, so I sort of stuck my hand up and asked this question. And rather than say yes, that's right, his response was, good God, Press, fancy you knowing that when the likes of Brown and Glaze from the front row didn't know it. And that was the answer, and all that did, of course, was make me less likely to want to say anything. But I went to university in London. Like I say, a local college, which no longer exists, and that was the beginning of my coming out. It wasn't an event, but it just took a while for me to get used to my sexuality and to accept feeling different. But that's been a lifelong journey for me. And even now there are occasions when you feel out of place, even though it's not a secret.
Yeah. Tell us about your journey to becoming Vice Chancellor. How did you end up in Manchester?
Well, lots of people look back. Lots of people will tell you they have a career plan. When you're doing appraisals and reviews, people talk about their career plans. But I think the reality is, it's very easy to construct a retrospective career plan, based on what you did, and put some sort of reason around it. But in reality, you're sort of driven by events. And the thing that really helped me was I've always had someone there who's been an advocate for me. And this is actually, if I just talk about this, when I was a PhD student at Manchester University, it was quite sort of competitive in the lab. We were all sort of vying for the attention of our supervisor. And he and his wife are absolutely lovely people. And we did a lot of field work and visits to peat bogs across the world. Very exciting. And one of the other students, said to him, John, do you know Malcolm's gay? And the rest of the lab was all chattering about this, that I'd been outed. And actually, he and his wife couldn't care less. Said, oh yeah, we already knew. it doesn't make any difference. And actually, all it did was sort of bring us closer. But it was that, I forgot why I'm telling the story now, but...
what kind of age were you when that happened?
I was in my early 20s when that happened, and that was the sort of first coming out moment. But even though that was...
forced out of the closet.
Sorry, forced out of the closet. But the really funny thing was about 4 other blokes in the lab over the next 10 years actually came out as being gay. So my PhD supervisor used to joke about there being something in the water in that particular lab at the University of Manchester, which I've never gone back to test, by the way. But I think the thing about that was that he was an ally, and I didn't know. These were in the days when no one talked about allies, and you didn't really sort of, as a concept, we didn't know about it. But actually, he was my first ally, and he was there throughout my career supporting me. So you said, what did I do? So I went from doing that PhD at Manchester University, I went to be a research assistant at University College. And then 5 years later, a lectureship came up at Manchester Uni, and he was head of department at the time. So, of course, he was promoting me and encouraging me to apply for it, which I did, and I got the job. So I was there for a few years, and I went to the University of Sheffield. I became a professor, and I was head of biology at the University of Sheffield for a bit. And I went to the University of Birmingham, and I was on the senior management team there. I was head of the faculty for a bit, and I was responsible for research across the university. And then we came back to Manchester to take on this job as Vice-Chancellor at Manchester Metropolitan University. So I've been there since 2015. So none of that was planned. It was all a consequence of people saying to me, well, you could do that. And then me thinking for the first few years, no, I couldn't. And then thinking, you know what, I probably could do that. But it required, I think, a big effort on my part to see myself in that space. And one thing I would say, you talked about discrimination at work for LGBT people. My reflection on that is that you have to be very good at your job in order to be less likely to be discriminated against. And what I've seen is the better people are at their jobs, the less likely people will be to have a go at them about something. And when people look to have a go at you about something, they might look to have a go at you about your sexuality or something that they perceive as being different. Now, I'm not saying, but that's how I felt. You may feel differently, but I felt as though I had to be the very, very best version of me I could be. Possibly as a defence or a protective, forming a protective sheath around myself, I don't know. But I always had this sense that I need to be really good. If I wasn't, this was something people would use to get
it's like
at me.
A force field that
protects
you.
It felt a bit like that, really. But maybe that was just me. Maybe others had a bit more confidence at the time and didn't feel like that. But
and specifically, you applied for a couple of jobs being Vice-Chancellor, but you ended up in Manchester. And just tell us what the recruitment agent said to you about that.
So we haven't rehearsed this, of course. I applied for a job before I got this one, actually, to be a Vice-Chancellor in a small town rural university. I didn't get it. And it was too early, for me to have got it anyway, so I wasn't hugely devastated. But the feedback from the recruitment consultant was fascinating, because what he said to me was it would have probably been a hard place to be a gay Vice-Chancellor. You'd be much better off in Manchester. You just...
So how many Vice-Chancellor roles are there in Manchester?
Well, there are 4...
For our community.
Yeah, if anyone's interested, there are 4 universities in Greater Manchester. There's Manchester Metropolitan University, University of Manchester. There is a joke I could tell about that, but I didn't try this one out with you beforehand, so I'm not sure I dare tell this joke. But I'll tell you over a drink afterwards. University of Bolton and University of Salford. So there's 4 of us, and we all get on really well. So there's, like I say, 4 of us, and we all get on really well. But none of the jobs are available at the moment. If they do come up and you're interested, let me know. I'll do my best. But actually, the best, on coming out, the real moment for me, and I did tell Claire this story, was the first time I went to India, and I was on a really amazing training program that involved going to Mumbai for a week with a bunch of leaders from different sectors. There were 2 chief constables, a serving chief medical officer, senior civil servants, HR directors from FTSE 100 companies. It was an amazing training course that the University of Birmingham sent me on. And the idea was to visit all these different sorts of leadership organisations in Mumbai, ranging from multinationals to community organisations. And I was sort of out, but not really out at that time. In that I wasn't really talking about it, but it wasn't a secret. And we went to this organisation called the Hamzafar Trust, which I'm not sure if anyone would have heard of, but it's an LGBT community organisation in Mumbai, and it's got amazing global funding from NGOs across the world, and it's an LGBT support organisation dealing with all aspects of LGBT health and legal issues, and it can be quite challenging in India. So we spent the afternoon with them, lots of workers. Most of the conversation was taking place in a local language, and the chief executive was translating for us. So after 3 or 4 hours of hearing these really moving stories and really amazing things people were doing, the person leading our group said to the chief executive, well, is there anything you'd like to ask us at this point? And the chief exec said, well, I'll just ask my colleagues. There's a lot of chatter. And he said, well, there is a question. It's the same question that they always ask whenever we have international visitors. I'll ask you the question out of respect to my colleagues, but please do not feel obliged to answer the question. And the question was, are any of you gay? Because, of course, we spent the whole afternoon listening to these amazing stories. And what happened next was really very amusing, because we were a group of 24 people. And I need to be very careful not to reveal who I'm talking about. But there was a person on the group who was quite stroke very camp, quite stroke very flamboyant. And we all thought he was gay, but nobody sort of really knew or said anything about it. So we all went like this and looked over there. And I was sitting over here. So they were looking over there. And I thought, I can't not put my hand up after listening to all this. So I stuck my hand up, and everybody went, and looked the other way. And then they looked back to see if he put his hand up, but he hadn't. So it's really quite amusing. So when we got back, nobody gave two hoots about the fact that I stuck my hand up. It was like, oh, X didn't stick his hand up. I wonder if he's gay or not. And it was really quite funny. And then a couple of years later, I was in London, and I went for some drinks and dinner in a well-known LGBT bar restaurant in Soho with my partner. And when we went in, who should be sitting there? And again, this doesn't mean anything, but who should be sitting there right in the entrance with a very sort of fancy cocktail with an umbrella and a small firework? But this guy, surrounded by a lot of friends that looked like they were all in the same club. So it was really quite amusing, and I don't know to this day whether he's gay or not. But I suppose what you can draw from that is, if we think we've got it hard, crikey, those people in Mumbai had it really hard, and some of the challenges we're talking about are really first world challenges. We need to remember what it's like to be an LGBT person in a country where it is illegal, where you will be subject not just to discrimination but all forms of prejudice by friends, families, and work colleagues. So we've got challenges, but there are even greater challenges in other parts of the world. The second thing is you can't necessarily make assumptions about people, despite what you might think or feel about them. And the third thing is, never lose your sense of humour, because you've got to laugh at some of these things, even though they may be politically slightly incorrect at times. So I'm a great believer in the importance of humour in some of these things. And so it was a really funny incident, and it's something that's sort of stayed with me for a very long time.
How old are you at Manchester Met?
Well, we can ask Yannicka, actually. It's always better to... so Yannicka is a colleague of mine at university. I haven't sort of publicised this at work, so I didn't want people to feel like they had to come. But Yannicka very kindly has joined me. So what's the answer to that question? I know I'm supposed to be answering the questions, but what's the answer to that question?
I think you're very open about it. Everybody knows, and everybody... Not in a massive announcement way, but it's very known, but in a very ordinary way. But it's definitely known, and I know that for those of us who are LGBT in the organisation, it makes a huge difference, because it means there is very little question about us, and it has a huge effect on the organisation and the culture, because what you were saying about bullying, that would just not be different.
Yeah, so what I would say is I'm out, but I try not to be a bore about the fact that I'm a gay man, because what I've noticed on thank you for that really lovely introduction. Those are things I don't longer do, but I did do them in the past. But I am a non-exec on a few boards, and what I noticed on those boards is that there's usually one or two people that are what I would call single issue non-exec directors or single issue trustees, and I don't want to be a sort of single issue person. So I'm out at work, I'm out everywhere, But I talk about it sometimes, but I try not to bore anyone about it because, you know, I don't want to be bored about things that other people feel really passionately about. So I think, you know, keeping these things in balance is important. Now, again, some of you may disagree and think that we do need to be talking about it to everyone, everywhere, all the time. But you have to do what you're comfortable with, don't you?
Mm-hmm. And is there, obviously we've heard quite a lot of your sort of career story there. Is there anything you wish you'd done differently throughout your career?
Well, I guess this might apply to everybody who's come out, whether it's been a sort of instantaneous moment or whether it's something that's happened over a period of time. Is, you know, you wish you'd done it sooner, and you wish you'd been role modelling the things that you believe in from an earlier age. So that's something that I wish I could have done, but for whatever reason, I didn't have the confidence or the courage, or perhaps it's to do with the support, you know, to actually feel that I could do it. And then even now, you sometimes question, you know, what you do, and are you doing enough, and are you giving enough back? You know, because I've really benefited from supporting, you know, from the support other people have given me. And sometimes you sort of have to question your own behaviours and think whether you could do more. But yeah, I don't know. I think coming out earlier, you know, on a very personal note, you know, both my parents absolutely knew and talked about it, and they met my now husband, and Mum used to refer to him as a second son. But you know, we never actually had the coming out conversation. They just knew, and I wished I told them, rather than it just become an assumption that we all lived. So yeah, that's something that I regret as well.
So some people would say that we've made a lot of progress as a community in the last couple of decades. What do you think the key challenges are at the moment, and why? What do you think we can do to support young people now?
Well, I think, as I've already intimated, I think, you know, the importance of allies and the importance of role models cannot be underestimated. So the more of that, the better. You know, in my job, I get asked about all sorts of protected characteristic groups, and the one thing I would say people find very difficult is the issue of language, and there's a lot of sensitivity about language. You know, what you call somebody, how you describe something. And I think if you're not in a protected characteristic group, people feel, and they tell me they feel very nervous about how to frame things and how to say things. So I think, you know, we need to find a way of being more accepting and understand what people are trying to say, what people really do mean, rather than sort of jump on something. So I'll give you an example. So I'm fine if I'm on the phone call to the bank. Sorry, I'm fine if you know, I'm talking to somebody, and they say, you know, is your wife here? And I'll say, well, I don't have a wife. You know, my partner, my husband is here. You know, because people are talking, they're not necessarily thinking. They may have had a drink. They don't mean any harm by it. They're usually embarrassed if you point it out, and it's not a mistake they'll make again. But I do get annoyed if I'm on the phone to the bank where somebody's working off a script. And they say, does your wife have a credit card on the same account? You know, and you'll say no. Well, we've got 2 cards on the account. Yes, that's my husband's card. You know, so it's that sort of thing that I think we need to focus on. So, and I think the way to do that is to be understanding of people when they do struggle to find language. And, you know, I sometimes struggle to find language when I'm talking to black and minority ethnic colleagues at work. You know, I made a mistake once saying black and an ethnic minority rather than minority ethnic, and somebody sort of came down on me. You know, I sort of got that wrong. And so I think you're being understanding of people and trying to work with them around language, and not making language so complicated that, you know, as you say, that things become a mouthful and unusable.
Yeah, and
I don't know. I mean, people have their own views on that one.
This is a world that's changing and shifting all the time, and it can be quite hard to sort of navigate sometimes. One of my good friends has set up an organisation called She Leads for Legacy, which is helping black women in leadership roles. But one of the things that she always says is, think about the intention, not necessarily the actual articulation all the time, like the intention behind it, and is it positive? And if it is, then, you know, be a bit more relaxed about these things.
That's right. I mean, you touched outside when talking about the use of data. And I think, you know, we all collect data as organisations. I think using that data purposely to understand how different groups of people, different subsets of people, what the outcomes for those people are across the organisation. You know, so at the university, there's a big focus on attainment gaps for students based on ethnicity, and the work, we're doing a lot of work to try and reduce those attainment gaps, and they're really quite individual things you have to do that. There's not a sort of magic wand you can wave at it. So I think using data, I think, is also important.
And I would value other people's perspectives on this in the room. So I'm going to ask Malcolm one more question, and then I'm going to come to the audience for questions, for your ideas as well. Don't feel like this is our space and you're not allowed your opinions. So please feel free to share. So my last question is about companies that have diversity and inclusion policies. All the policies are in place, shiny documents. How do we make sure those companies are actually nice places to work, places where you can bring your whole self to work if you want to, not if you don't want to, but properly accepting rather than just box tickers?
So every organisation will have drawers full of these policies, or discs of these policies, whatever people store information on these days. But the thing is, you can tick a box by having that, but what you actually need is one side of A4 that lists 4 or 5 things that are to do with behaviours. Because people talk about culture and changing culture. What culture is ultimately about is the collective behaviour of individuals. So my approach is, I don't want a big manual that tells you what to do if there's an explosion in the business school. I need 4 or 5 things that everybody understands we need to do. And it's the same with EDI matters as well. I think it's having something which is clear and straightforward that's to do with the way that we all behave.
Yeah. I agree with that. Right, we're going to go to questions. Matt's on the prowl.
Yeah, plays with the microphone. So if you want to stick your hand up, we want to make this accessible not just to extroverted neurotypicals as well. So I will be keeping an eye on my phone, so you can tweet us or use Pride in Leadership as a hashtag, and I will ask that question for you if you like. If, when you ask a question, you could give us your name, your organisation, and your pronouns if you would like, that would be much appreciated. So I'm going to come to you, Steph.
Thanks very much. Brian Boak, and I'm at the University of Salford, but also with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority LGBT Advisory Panel co-lead. The question I really wanted to ask, listening to both of you, was what advice would you give to somebody who is starting off their life in business, wants to be an entrepreneur, wants to get out there? You talked a little bit about doubt in your life, but how do you open those doors in a world that might want to close them, especially these days?
So are you asking the question in the context of LGBT people or anyone? LGBT people. Well, I think the thing is to be open about yourself, actually. And what colleagues tend to find at work is nobody wants to work with anybody who's a closed book. And so it's about caring about your co-workers, and you can care about your co-workers, I think, best if you have an understanding of their hinterland. So I think it's getting the right balance between opening up and talking about things, and then doing a good job working together as a team. Because if you think about it, almost everything is done as part of a team these days, isn't it? And so to work together as a team, you need to understand the strengths of people in that team. And I think part of that is understanding how they think and how they do things, and part of that is understanding a bit about their background as well. I don't know, I mean, what would you say? If I turn the question back to you.
Can I just give you the microphone, Brian?
I usually have a loud enough voice. I'm not young anymore, I have to say. I've had that sudden thought, oh, heavens, retirement is closer to when I started. But I think for a lot of young people who are fearful, especially in a post-COVID world, it's about putting yourself forward and using your networks. And this, as we were talking earlier, where is the LGBT community networks? How do we do it well? How do we make sure it's built? And I suppose selfishly, how do we look after each other in that caring kind of way?
I think that's a really good point. One of the things that I'd almost forgotten, I felt this actually, when I moved back to Manchester in 2015, it suddenly felt like a city in which it was actually a positive attribute to be gay, whereas everywhere else I'd worked, it felt like a disadvantage. But here, it felt like a positive attribute, and the Lord Mayor at the time actually said to me, and I'm not going to do the impersonation in a very strong local accent, he said to me, and Carl will know who I'm talking about probably, he said to me, Swear word, swear word, swear word. If you're not swear word gay in this city, you're at a massive disadvantage. So all good luck to you. But seriously, it's the first time I've worked in a city where it does feel as though you're on equal footing. So the networks are important, actually.
I have always felt like that about Manchester, actually. I feel like the rainbow flag is weaved through the DNA of Manchester. It's always felt like that to me. I've been holding hands with my wife for 20 years in this city, and certainly we weren't doing that in some other places all those years ago. Increasingly now. Thank you for your question, Brian. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that, or any other questions that they would like to ask?
I'll probably put everybody off by firing the questions back at the person asking.
Well, you answer it. Yes, please.
Hello. Should I stand up?
Hello.
Stand up and introduce yourself, Elizabeth. I've just done it for you.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Just quietly here. I'll introduce myself. Elizabeth Cameron. I'm an ED&I lead, actually, for my job. But I guess my whole life and my passion, I'm a bit of an equalities warrior. So I definitely, I'm attacking the whole world and society in terms of fairness and inclusion, and I'm an intersectional black woman who feels intensely proud of all the parts of me that I am. So I'm in that good place in life, and I'm glad. I wanted to comment that I'm really happy that you touched on your friend who's got the work, Sharon, who's doing the work around black leadership. And how it's very important, I think, in this world that we're in, that we're not doing a pecking order of sort of who's doing the worst and who's should we put first, because intersectionality is so important. Sometimes we're there in 2 spheres, or 3, or even 4, as I managed to tick 4 boxes. So my comment to you really was that I've loved your talking, and you said something about that you mentioned some, be kind about the sort of people who make mistakes, as it were, and that you talked about a colleague who was black, and you possibly had said something to her in a way that, or him or whoever, in a way that they weren't happy. And I think there's a lot of trauma there behind the black British person you see today, or behind blackness, and said collectively. And I think, how do we get people to that level of that understanding that, as you talked about, it's your family, the things you didn't say, it's so much deeper than what is on the surface of, I want you to know my pronoun. So sometimes what comes back at you is what I wanted to say. Sometimes what comes back at you is really very deep trauma, and not really about that word, but about what people are carrying with them. And I think that I really want to speak to that in terms of intersectionality, because so many of the black communities I'm speaking, I know I'm generalizing, but are so deeply entrenched in homophobic attitudes that, we can't divorce ourselves from that. And that's why I attached it to your family, if you didn't mind me doing that, and things you hadn't said. So I wondered if you just want to comment on that, because I picked up on that thing that was you said.
I mean, there's a lot to comment on.
There is.
There'll be, and everybody will have their...
What do you want to say?
Yeah, so what do I want to say? So I'd say something very short. So thank you for sharing all of that, and it was interesting to listen to. I guess what I heard was something about the importance of sharing lived experiences, people's lived experiences, and that, at the risk of being controversial, I think those are more important than sharing pronouns, to cite what you said. So I actually don't have again, being controversial, I don't have my pronouns on my signature, my email signature, but I think I'm very happy for people in the university to do that, and a lot do, as Yannick will attest. But for me, there is more to it than things which I'm not saying that is symbolic, but some people would interpret it as symbolic. But I think having a culture and environment at work where everybody can be themselves and feel valued and talk about themselves, and those are things that really matter to me. And I want a university community. We're a community of 38,000 students and 5,000 staff. I want everybody in that community to feel as though there is no limit on their aspiration. And the more we can work together and support one another, the better we'll be. And the more neurodiverse we are as a community, the better we'll fare as well. So I might not be answering the specific thing you wanted me to discuss, but certainly I'm reflecting on what you had to say.
I think there was a very deep question in there, and I just wondered if there's also an alternative answer out here about the pronouns. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to say about that while we've just touched on that topic? And if not, we can. Do you have a question, Chris? Vicky, and then Chris.
Thank you. I just wondered if the small things matter. So my daughter's gay. Her partner Chloe moved in with us over lockdown for 3 weeks, and she's still here. My dad is from Yorkshire and very tight. He always just gives you 20 quid in a card. It's not gone up in about 15 years. But what he always does do, he buys a card that says to my daughter, to my son-in-law, to my granddaughter. He couldn't find a card for Chloe. He got one that said to my granddaughter's fiance, and he crossed out fiance and put girlfriend. Does that matter?
I think yes, it does matter.
You should go to whatever ghastly shop my mum always finds. Okay.
So one practical tip is you could probably order a card online or design a card online to say that, but that's not the point of the question, which obviously I appreciate. But yeah, it does matter. To be serious, it does matter.
Yeah, that's right. Chris, you had a question.
Thanks, Chris Gray from And Digital. Malcolm, I guess we live in quite fragile times, and to a certain extent, if I look at, say, cancel culture and the universities and who you can have to come and speak, there's bits of that possibly bleeding into business and almost a backlash, perhaps against the word woke and being too woke. I just wonder how you're feeling navigating some of those tensions that perhaps I think universities are at the forefront of right now, but maybe bleeding into wider society.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about that one, Chris. The reality of the matter is there are very few examples of speakers who have been denied access to university campus. Very, very small numbers indeed across the country. Every university leader will tell you that. Those that have had difficulty tended, on average, to be right-leaning or right-thinking speakers or conservative speakers. And it is the political dimension of that has attracted the attention of the government rather than the reality of a problem that needs to be solved. And my view is, there are plenty more urgent things we need to sort out in the world than trying to regulate free speech on campus, because we are required to allow freedom of speech and freedom of expression on campus by law. I don't really think that the legislation that's going through Parliament at the moment and the rationale that underpins it is really required. So I'm being sort of unusually controversial for me because I'm always apolitical, and I believe I have to be in my role because I don't want anyone to feel alienated at work because of their politics. But in this particular instance, there isn't a strong body of evidence to say that universities are preventing freedom of speech or freedom of expression. And I think what we have to do is to allow anyone to express their views and to debate topics as long as they're not breaking the law. And I think that's the easiest way to frame it. And we need to be robust enough to listen to views that actually are divergent from our own. Because, through that, you can create greater understanding, ultimately. So I think businesses need to embrace that too and be confident about the fact that as long as we're on the right side of the law, we should be able to talk about anything. So if it's illegal or if it's untruthful, evidently untruthful, it shouldn't be allowed. But as long as it doesn't fall into one or other of those two camps, then I think, universities are, organisations where we should encourage that sort of thought and freedom of thought.
Are there any more questions? Okay, Rachel, and then this gentleman over here.
Hi, it was more of an observation because I was thinking we talked about being intersectional before and like language and being inclusive, and you were mentioning about people can default to saying husband or wife and make gendered assumptions about our partners. At the moment, I've been quite sort of talked about being child-free by choice, and I think this is a very intersectional issue that isn't getting that same attention.
So I didn't quite hear that last.
Oh, sorry. Which bit didn't you hear?
Child-free by choice.
Oh, child-free by choice.
And that being an intersectional issue around choices around family. And I was wondering where you're seeing that conversation go, because I will never make an assumption about whether somebody has a child or not. But particularly, I suppose, for the LGBT community, adoption and options for how you can have a family are opening, but people also have that choice to not have a family. So I was interested where we could take the concept of what does your family look like in a more inclusive and intersectional way to open up that conversation.
Well, again, I think it's the same type of thing where people will genuinely ask questions as a way of trying to form a relationship with you. But in doing that, they make certain assumptions. So I think what we should try and do is frame questions in a way that don't create any sort of value judgment around the answer. And again, the more open that we can be, the more likely people are to frame questions in a way that doesn't actually contain a value judgment if you have to answer one way or the other. So I'm not an expert on this, but that's what that will be my instinct.
Matt, we've got a question over here at the front.
Hi, my name's Sam, and I'm a spoken voice, accent, and gendered voice tutor at about 5 drama conservatoires across the country. So one thing I'm noticing with my students is that maybe 10 to about 30% of that acting population is coming out as trans or non-binary. So firstly, I wanted to say, really appreciate that someone in such a high leadership role across education is LGBTQ and out, so I appreciate that. I was just wondering if Manchester Metropolitan was doing anything to educate the other areas of the student body, so like sciences, math, medicine, to help create a more inclusive environment, or where do you think the university could do that?
So we have a very active students' union, and we have sabbatical officers in the students' union, and one of the sabbatical roles focuses around inclusivity. So through the students' union and the dozens, hundreds of clubs and societies that the university has, we can bring together students who come from different disciplinary backgrounds. And I think what would be interesting to know is whether there are actually more trans and gender fluid students in the disciplines you've referred to than in some STEM subjects, or whether there are just greater opportunities for those students to express themselves in a way that enable others to understand where they're coming from. So, like all these things, it's not quite as straightforward as it might first appear.
Ollie, got you. Your steps are going to be good, Matt.
Hi, Malcolm. Oh, God, it's very weird hearing yourself through a speaker. There's a lot of businesses here, different sizes, different people doing different roles. What can we learn from what the university is doing on getting more applications, that positive action of getting students from a diverse background to apply to the university? Is there anything that we can learn there in this talent war, trying to encourage people to come and work for our businesses as we try to grow? Is there anything there? Or the answer could be no, by the way.
Sorry?
The answer can be no, if that's all right.
So universities are made up of 2 essentially groups of people. There are academics who do the teaching and the research, and then there are colleagues in professional services who do everything else. And we're about 50-50 mix, and that will be true for most universities. In our professional services areas, we're restricting all our entry-level jobs to our graduates. And because we recruit about 40% of our graduates from the region, and we have a disproportionately large number of graduates who are either first generation into university or from BAME backgrounds, that is enabling us to diversify our workforce. And I think the generic point from this is I think that we need to take active steps in order to ensure that we can select from the widest possible pool when it comes to filling vacancies. And so in our case, we can do that by focusing our entry-level roles on a particular target group. But in other areas, it may come down to thinking about perhaps the interview process or the selection process. So one thing that we're exploring for some roles at work is to give people access to the questions they'll be asked to interview, maybe 15 or 20 minutes beforehand, in order to see whether people can perform differently on the basis of having some pre-knowledge of the question. So I don't think there's a magic single thing that can be done, but I think it's about thinking creatively to find ways in which you can select from the widest talent pool possible. Because it must be true that brilliance, creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship are evenly distributed across the country. And that means that those amazing things that we all need to thrive will be everywhere in everyone. We've got to find the people that have those things that will make our businesses stronger and better. And so we have to think about the processes that we deploy to select people. And I think thinking about what they might be is something that we can do. So I think there's a single answer. There may be, but to my knowledge, there isn't a single answer to your question. But being aware of the challenge of trying to get a diverse workforce into place matters. And at the university, I'm often asked about diversity. It's one of the we've got 27 departments. I tour the departments. I talk to colleagues in the academic departments, and one of the questions I most often ask is about diversity and EDI issues. And what I'm keen to say to people is that it is about getting the strongest talent pool from which to select, rather than just making sure at the end of the day that you just appoint one of this and one of that and one of the other. And when people talk about diversity, I'm very keen to sort of talk about it, the importance of it from both a social justice perspective, but also from a business perspective, because there's so much evidence to show that the more diverse your talent pool at work, the more resilient you are as an organisation, the better quality of decisions that are taken, the more you look like your customers, the more you can understand your customers, and the more your customers are likely to turn to you. So I think there's a whole bunch of business reasons why diversity matters, as well as a whole bunch of social reasons why diversity matters. And so having these types of conversations in the workplace is really good, because everybody will buy into that, and then you can start to think about active steps that you can take to get that diversity into your business. So that's rather a waffly long answer, but I was thinking as I was talking.
That was great. Right, we're going to take one last question, and then I'm going to ask you, Malcolm, at the end of that question to do my job for me and tell us what we can do with this pride in leadership. We've got all these people who've bothered to turn up today. We've got all a common sense of something that we might do together. So I'm going to ask you to sum that up at the end of, after answering this gentleman's question.
Good evening, everybody. Can I be heard? Yeah? Easily? Okay. My name's Ian Scott, and I operate, amongst other things, Canal Street Media. And I have currently over 40 years' experience as an out gay man in the wonderful city of Manchester. And I don't actually have any questions, but one of the most impressive things that I've heard tonight was the comment that you made about talent and being good at what you do. And certainly my experience in all of those years supports that. So as the first out gay man in the world of advertising, for instance, in Manchester, which was something that you would imagine created a lot of our community because of advertising, creativity, all of those things. There were lots of people there, but nobody was actually prepared to stand by who they are and what they were doing. So I completely concur that actually being good at what you do kind of puts prejudice to some degree to one side. If you're really good, we've talked to and heard a lot about very famous people, and they are supported and tolerated to some degree because they're exceptionally good at what they do. And I know in this room there's a lot of very talented people who are trying and have already created businesses based on their individual talent. So singularly, I think that's the most impressive thing that you've said for me all night. It's been my experience, and I just think, okay, hearts and minds, people pay you lip service because they've got to, but ultimately you will find no greater prejudice than actually within our own community. And I know that there are operators of bars, restaurants, businesses, bookshops, right across, who actually don't support our community because of rivalry, because of commercial interest. So I think we've got to be really clear about what it is that makes us different and special and admired and all of those things. And I personally think it's just working hard, being good at what you do, working with allies. There's a lot that I want to say, but I'm not going to. That was really impressive, and it's your story, it's my story, and I bet it's a lot of these people in this room's story as well.
Thank you. Would you like to respond?
Well, I don't want to sort of repeat what I've already said, but thank you for sharing that story that story with us. Thinking about it and going back to the comment that the lady over here made, probably for most people there'll be something that they see in themselves that creates a sense of lack of confidence, or they think sets them apart. If only I weren't this, or if only I were that. And part of me actually realised what it's like to be a sort of straight, white, middle-aged male these days, and because it's sometimes very hard for those people because they're in a world where diversity is so important and really matters. So I think for me it's recognising that everybody, almost everybody, will be carrying something that other groups would see as setting them apart. And if I move on to answer your question, Claire, I think the most important thing to me from tonight and thinking about this is that it's really lovely to feel part of a club, actually. Really lovely to feel part of a club and to be part of a community, even though you might not know all the people in the community. It's really nice to feel that. And when I was at the University of Birmingham, and I was talking to somebody more senior there about what I might do with my career as part of the development discussion, I was told I would never get a job as a Vice Chancellor because I wasn't, quote, clubbable. And I sort of looked at him and thought, do you know what? That's a really horrible thing to say, but he did sum up how I felt, because I didn't feel part of that club, at all. And I think what we need to do is to sort of define our own club, but make sure it's a club that is not inclusive. It's a club that has a semi-permeable membrane around it that recognises the importance of allies as well as role models. And I think, being part of a community really does matter, and knowing that there are people out there who support you and who are like you really does matter. And I think the bit about doing well in your job, my upbringing, was all about being the very best version of me that I could be, because, that's what my parents made enormous sacrifices to allow. And, because I believe in education, I believe education is the source of enlightenment and can transform lives. And I learned that in India too, actually. Go to India, there won't be a single family that doesn't believe education is the way through it. Come to the UK, half the previous cabinet didn't believe that. But that is what really matters. I'll end up with one.
Which cabinet did you mean?
Well, I don't
the
know.
One of yesterday or the day before?
So on that trip to India, the other interesting thing that was going on was there was a reality show being broadcast across the whole of the country. And it wasn't like the sort of reality show that we have over here. It wasn't about who can sing and dance or tell stories or manage performing dogs or whatever. It was a show to win one of 6 scholarships to study for a degree at a foreign university. And my institution at the time, University of Sheffield, was hosting one of those students, and the prize was a scholarship to do biomedical science for 3 years. And that was prime time viewing. And that's the sort of thing I want for our country, because that is what will make a difference.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. I found that a fascinating conversation. I've found all of these conversations that we've had, all the other ones online, obviously, fascinating as well. And I really hope that you've enjoyed it. Please tell your friends about us. Help us to grow this organisation. We're brand spanking new, so please just help us to get the word out there. And we've got loads of food now. We wanted to spend our money with a diverse organisation. We've got Jerk Junction outside providing Caribbean food, and it's beautiful. And a young girl who's 15 set up a little business called Daisy Bakes, and she has made us some rainbow cakes as well, and they're out there. So please have, go and enjoy your evening and network and socialise and everything. And if anyone does want to stay out drinking later, we're going to head over towards the village, and we're going to go to a new wine bar that's above campus. It's called Bees Wing, and hopefully you'll join us there as well. I've reserved a little space on the balcony, and the sun's shining. Thank you all for coming. Thanks so much.